Now, 3 o'clock is a pretty tough time to present, guys, because I don't know about you, but I've been out and about having a great time this morning, seeing other presenters and spending money in the trade stalls, and I've had to kind of come in here and put my game face on and go, right, it's a pleasure to be here. Have you guys had a good morning? Fantastic. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. I've had a number of riders I already work with that have sent me text messages today to say, Liz, is it okay if we don't come to your presentation? Because Mary King's on, and we've heard your stuff before, so we're going to go there. So I'm glad I've got any audience to talk to this afternoon. So thank you so much for being here with me. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of what I do with at NSwiss, with the riders that I work with, and what it means to go riding with your physio. So it's a bit weird, isn't it? A physio for horse riders. Now this is a direct quote from one of our national coaches. I won't divulge any names there. But it's, it's actually, I've heard it a few times, but it's not weird, because in any sport we have our sort of human movement performance specialists. And what our job is to understand the sport, to understand the skills that sport needs, and to be able to optimise performance. And I think what's particularly relevant for horse riding is that we need to actually understand the lifestyle that goes with riding, and how the sport side of it and then the lifestyle side actually interact together when we think of it from a human movement point of view. Riding is such a tradition-based sport. So there hasn't been a whole lot of sports science presence within the sport. We sort of, we ride and we just do what we've always done. And it's really, really exciting that we're actually seeing a stronger presence of sports science. And certainly, our European riders are doing a lot more, maybe than we are here in Australia. But people like John Pitts. Did anyone hear John Pitts speak yesterday? John's fantastic, and John really gave us a great sense yesterday of what we're actually doing when we're riding a horse from a movement perspective. So I'll take some of his ideas and build on them in some slightly different ways. But what he really created was an understanding for us around what we need to consider as equestrian athletes. So this weird thing, this physio for horse riders, I'll tell you how it happened. So I was working at NSwiss, New South Wales Institute of Sport, and we were having a conversation around, which squads we were going to work with. So who's going to work with swimming, who's going to work with gymnastics. And out of the back of my head, I just thought, guys, who works with the equestrian squad? Because we have an equestrian squad. And it was conversation stopping. They all sort of looked at me and said, no one knows what they do. They're all out the back of whoop whoop, can't even get them to stretch their hamstrings, and anyway, they're not really athletes. So what I do as a physio that has ridden, is a bit of a right of reply against that kind of common misconception that we're not really athletes. So it's important that if we're going to talk about stuff, we make it relevant to you. So what are your problems? So these are obvious everyday things that we see as observers, as instructors, parents. These are the things that you'll see when someone says, how do I look? And that's always a loaded question because you don't want to answer that question. But do you do any of the following? Do you sit crookedly? Do you consistently fall off to one side? It doesn't really matter what you're doing, but you always go left. Do you notice you have one shoulder higher than the other? I had a hack rider I was working with a little while ago who said, oh, it's all right, I fixed that, I just put a shoulder pad in. I just thought, well, yes, it might get you through a rider class, but it's not great for your horse. Do you have one hand that's always higher than the other? Do you bounce around in the saddle? Can you not breathe? Do you grip and tense and hold? And do you feel unsteady or unsafe? Now, can anyone tick any of those for themselves when they ride? Okay. So when we get on and when we try and move, we move through the path of least resistance. So we actually use what is the easiest movement pattern. So it's where our body gets pulled by restrictions within our body. It's where our brain decides where is the easiest and safest place to move. And if that's not the correct position, we have to work out, well, why can't you do what is actually ideal for this sport? And is there an anatomical reason that means that you're stuck in that position? So when we can work out what actually is your problem, then we can work on how do we train, how do we correct that, so that you and your horse can work together. Because if there's something physically stopping you being able to do a certain movement pattern, it won't matter how you understand that movement. It won't matter what metaphors your instructor uses. You can grow like a tree and have roots down through your feet and ice cream dripping out your heels, but it makes no sense. It's frustration around the fact that your body lets you down. And that's what I do as a physio, is I look at, well, why can't you respond to those particular cues? Because our stuff in our body is going to show up in your horse. So they have to, they sort of have to carry us and carry our problems. And we're so lucky that they put up with some of the stuff that they do put up with. And I think they adapt to us so well over time. But what it will show up for them is, over time, will be unsoundness. And it can lead to behavioural problems as well, from the fact that our position is our communication. So if we actually sit, even subtly, in a turning aid, but we want to go the other way, it's like, well, what are we actually saying to that horse? And that, again, that's where your body lets you and your horse down. So some of the ways that our stuff might show up in our horse, things like crookedness in that horse, unevenness, bridle lameness, consistently wrong canter leads, like I just can't get my left canter lead, unsoundness for that horse. So this is over a period of time of having to carry our poor body position. Resistance, evasion, just like, what do you want me to do? Because you're telling me one thing and you think you're telling me another. And rushing. So behavioural stuff. And I suppose the key thing is it doesn't happen when someone else rides your horse. It's not necessarily a skill-based thing. Your instructor gets on and automatically it's better. Very often there's something that is different in your body versus what's different in your instructor's body. Does that sound familiar for anyone out there? We have these problems. This is good. It needs to be relevant to you. So the tricky stuff is always, what's the horse, what's the rider? Yeah, because horses have their stuff. We know that. What I always suggest to my riders is that we have to have some basic benchmarks for this sport, for this performance. So if you can prove to me on the ground that you could do basic movement patterns that are associated with riding, and that you can be straight and you can have the right range of motion, then you can blame your horse. But not until that point. Until you're actually taking some affirmative action, you can not blame your horse until then.